This is the Writers Are People Too podcast, where I just can't get writers to shut up. Tonight, we have with us sci-fi author Mike Marsbergen. So, Mike, tell me a little bit about yourself before we get into your writing.
Sure. So I'm a writer from Canada, and I've been doing it for about 15 years, but this is the first book that I put out. So,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
I saw that you'd written something like 100 stories, and we'll kind of get into some of your stories in a little bit.
Okay.
Um, but, you have this short story compilation
Yep.
called Another Life and Other Mind-Bending Sci-Fi Stories. And so I believe that that's actually one of the title of one of the specific stories in the anthology. So why
Yeah.
did you choose this particular title to represent the entire anthology?
Um, well, originally that story was going to be sort of like the longest story in the collection. It was about 12,000 words, and yeah, I thought it was going to be like the linchpin, if you will. Um, as I progressed into the story, into the collection, I kind of realized some other stories needed a lot more work, so I expanded those ones. Now that story it's probably like the third longest story in the collection. Another Life, I mean.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, it still resonated as being you know, the purpose, if you will, of the whole book.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the meaning of some of your stories in a minute here. But I noticed regarding the length, it was something like 500 pages on Amazon. That's like 170 some odd thousand words. You know what it is exactly?
so this is 117,000. So my
Okay.
font is a little bit larger, but I can show you, but I don't know if I can see that.
I mean, that's not unreasonably large. Seems fine to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's bigger than let's say standard size maybe, but
Okay.
it's still within range. Because I've
Do you
got
have
a
any
book
plans
here.
to do you have any plans to expand these stories into full length novels, or are you happy with where they're at as short stories?
No, I think it's good how they are because yeah, some of them I did already expand like for this collection.
Hmm.
Right. Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel like these are the definitive versions of like I gotta because if I don't know if you read like too much about them, but all these stories are essentially like old stories that I've kind of revisited.
Hmm.
So they're yeah, some of them go back to 2016, some of them go back to 2017, 2018.
Do you have any plans to revisit any of the other 100 stories that you've written and make their own
Um,
anthology?
Maybe, like there are some that I feel like still have value. Like it's hard to because I've been doing it for so long, it's hard to kind of like bring back some of these old stories and have them still be relevant to my writing today, if you know what I mean. Um, because yeah, it's like, different periods for me. It was like different eras for my writing. Like, I did more horror at one point. Another time I was doing more comedy. And yeah, it's just I need everything to kind of feel relevant to what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think it's not relevant to your current style and vision, or is it no longer relevant to society?
could be a little bit of both, but I think it's mostly just my current style, like what I want the
Hmm.
current brand to be. I need it to, have more cohesion, if you will.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a very fair point. Like I've definitely matured as an author from my past manuscripts as opposed to what I've actually just recently published. And my beta readers have even told me that, like, hey, you've matured so much in your characterization and stuff. And I'm like, oh, I mean, that's good to hear. And I think that comes kind of like with maturing in life and having more life experiences. Um, I do think it's interesting though to like look back at your previous works and compare it to what you've recently written. Have you ever done that with something you wrote like a decade ago?
Uh, well, I mean, almost, because yeah, some of these stories again go back to 2016, so I mean, we're getting kind of close.
Hmm.
So yeah, some of them it was the first time that I'd read it, in probably yeah 6 years, maybe longer than that. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, it was like sometimes you can feel like, yeah, I was onto something here. Like I was, I was writing really well, or the ideas flowed good. But then other times it's kind of like, okay, I could have been a little bit tighter here, or I could have, maybe done something different.
Yeah. And I mean, you're always going to find that. Like, I'll reread, and I kick myself every time I read something that I've already published for other people to see. I'm like, oh, I could just change the format of this sentence, or put this here, or add another descriptive word. And if you ever want to get something out, you just have to admit that it's as good as you can get it for that time. Obviously, you're going to want to change things all the time, but you just got to put it out for people to see at some point.
I agree.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the stories you have in your anthology. I see you basically in your book blurb you give a bunch of one sentence descriptors of the
Yeah.
stories in there. So we probably don't have time for all of them, but let's look at a couple of them. So the first one I highlighted: a desert wanderer finds a sentient supercomputer with a plan to restart civilization. So
Yep.
I love this premise already, and you got me asking questions like, what happened to the creators of this supercomputer? Do you even go into that?
Uh,
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that.
yeah. So that story is I am Ura. That's let's see here, the seventh story, I believe, in the collection.
Okay.
Yeah. So that one we do actually kind of go into what happened to the creators. It's kind of like a little, a little bit of a reference, if you will. Um, I mean, there's a lot of lore in the book. Like by that I mean, so let's say a story is set, in a futuristic time period. It does kind of like give you a little bit of history here and there in dialogue or description or whatever.
hmm
Yeah.
do all of your short stories dwell in the same universe, or do they each have their own universe?
So I used to do the whole shared universe thing when I first started out, but after a while I kind of got a little too crazy keeping everything together. So I ended up just doing self-contained stories. And the interesting thing is that with this collection, a lot of the stories do kind of feel like they have references to each other. So if you read it, everything in order, it kind of feels like a story is building on what came before.
Hmm.
It's hard to explain, but yeah,
Okay.
it's in.
Well, that's fair. You gotta make the readers read the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming this is a sort of dialogue between the Wanderer and this AI supercomputer. Is this like a philosophical conversation, or what's your idea behind this?
Yeah, there is a lot of philosophical conversation. There's a lot of just, I guess, friendship as well that develops between the two. Um, and yeah, there's a little bit, a smidgen of AI humor, you could say, that comes in there with like maybe a couple lines of dialogue. But
Okay.
yeah,
As I read this description of the story, I think it was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I just had this thought of this computer. Are you familiar with Hitchhiker's Guide?
I've heard of it, haven't read it, but
Okay.
yeah,
There's this scene where I haven't actually technically read the book, so everyone can judge me. I've just seen the movie.
yeah.
But there's this computer where they go and they ask it what the answer to life, the universe, and everything is. Where'd you get your inspiration for this wanderer finding this supercomputer in the middle of the desert?
Um, so originally the story was written for an old e-zine that I was a part of. So each issue would have like a subgenre or a theme that you'd have to write in. And yeah, the theme for this one was theological sci-fi.
Hmm.
So I kind of just, I just, I don't know, used my imagination. For some reason, it came up with like, what if a desert wanderer had been convinced that there was God out in the desert, and it turned
Hmm.
out to be this AI supercomputer. And yeah, that's
Okay.
how it
Yeah,
happened.
as soon as you said theology, that took a
Yeah,
different turn than philosophy.
yeah.
Um, without giving too many spoilers, are you hinting that this AI perhaps created the universe that we dwell in as like a simulation or something? Is that the direction you're going?
There is an element of simulation. but it's not. Maybe it isn't what people would expect.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot of my stories. They have like a lot of twists and turns and stuff. So I don't want to give too much away, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll move on to the second one here. You have a young man emerges from 40 years of cryostasis, cured of terminal disease, only to find his world has moved on just enough to leave him behind. So,
yep,
I'm a firm believer that science fiction writers we inform technology of the future, what people want to invent. They read the stories of science fiction writers and they say, I'm going to actually turn this into a reality. So,
yep.
where do you see the world in 40 years from now?
Uh, I try to be optimistic, but sometimes it does get hard. So some of my stories, they're more dystopians. Um, that one, so that's the final story in the collection. That one's called Still Love You. It's kind of romantic sci-fi, if you will, but it's got kind of a tragic twist. And yeah, that one, it's like, what if this technology was around? It's amazing technology. It can, keep people alive into the future so they can cure their diseases. Um, but yeah, he's kind of woken up, um, not far enough, I would say, where it feels like he's still living in his world, but it's different, like the people that are in his life have aged quite a bit, but he hasn't. So
Hmm.
it's a tough one.
So is this more a story about relationship then, or the technology and him trying to dwell in this new world?
It's a little bit of both, but it is primarily about his relations and how he deals with, this new world that he's in, which
Hmm.
is it's again it's like his world, but it's not changed enough. It's and by that I mean the people in his life they're still there for the most part, but yeah, they've gotten older and they've gotten older without him.
Hmm. Do
So
you
my
throw any
plot is
future tech in there?
sorry.
Do you throw any future tech in there?
Yeah, there's a little bit. There's a reference to self-driving cars and things like that. VR technology as well.
When does it supposedly take place from when it starts to 40 years later?
Uh, it's like an undetermined time frame, to be honest.
Okay.
Uh,
Oh, that's fine.
it could be like maybe the 2030s. It could be even beyond that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good segue into the final one I wanted to chat about, which was a VR addict receives an anonymous letter hooking her on the idea of true love.
Yep.
Um, so a VR addict. Do you ever play any VR games?
No, I haven't yet, but
You're
I play
missing
a
out.
lot of like regular games.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got an HTC Vive as well as an Oculus Rift. So I have a good amount of experience in VR. It's very engaging. Like,
Yep.
because I mean I play regular games too, but it's different to like have your headset on and then be in this whole world where you're running around with like dinosaurs chasing you, or like you're in a first person shooter or whatever it is, and then you take off your headset and there's a wall like a
Yeah.
foot in front of you, and you're just standing staring at a wall with this headset on for the last hour. In my
Yeah.
case, like 5 hours. It just depends. But I've actually also recently been on this kick for looking for AR glasses. And I feel like the technology that I want is like just out of reach. Like you
Yeah.
can kind of get some stuff that doesn't look like a big bulky headset, but it doesn't have all the tech that I would love to see crammed into an actual like AR headset. But we digress. So tell me more about this lady, this VR addict. How did she get to become an addict?
Okay, so that's the title story, Another Life. It's the first story after the prologue. Um, yeah, basically she's living in a world where a lot of people are lonely and they don't have a lot of human connection, and instead they, you know, live their lives in this virtual reality called Another Life, which is essentially a video game that's like ultra realistic. You can do anything, live a whole new life there. And yeah, so the VR in this world, it's beyond what we have. Like it doesn't use a headset. It uses essentially like a membrane that goes over the face, and it transports you to a new world. It like hijacks your vision or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, she just gets lost in that kind of world. Like she doesn't have a lot going on in her life. So it's another emotional story. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's another romantic sci-fi story, and yeah, it's a lot of people that have read it in its original form, which was like I think it goes back to 2019. That one, they would usually say it's like my best story or whatever.
Mm.
So it's it had to be in the collection.
So why do they say it's your best story? Have they divulged that information to you?
Usually it's the emotional punch that it has, and the I guess maybe the depth of the character, because it focuses basically on Natalie, the main character. It's almost entirely in her headspace.
So coming full circle to, let's just encapsulate your entire anthology. What kind of messages do you have spread throughout them, or is there an underlying message that you're trying to get to your audience?
Um, I do think that there's an overall message of like trying to maintain hope in the darkness.
Hmm.
Um, what I noticed when I was like reading through the whole story, like the whole book, I mean, while doing the final edits, there's a lot of very emotional stories. There's a lot of loneliness, longing for more, all that kind of stuff. It's so yeah. Sorry, it's
So is
hard
it
to
about like human connection is what you're saying? Like people looking for connection in everything they're doing?
yeah, and I think that kind of harkens back to the title, another life. Like, have you ever wanted to live another life, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. And I
definitely
mean, you're not alone. I'm sorry, what was that?
definitely longing for human connection for sure. That's a good
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and you're not alone with that theme of technology that's supposed to connect us more, really separating us. Like, I mean, you can just look at social media. It's supposed to bring us closer, but instead, people just stare at their phones instead of having human connection. Um, it's very interesting how, in this search for meaning, we kind of just separate ourselves from each other, and it's a sad reality. Well, yeah. Did you want to read an excerpt from any of your stories?
Yeah, sure. I'll read a couple paragraphs from the prologue.
Perfect.
So, walking into the power station now, breath hitching, pistol at the ready, Tilly's sense of smell was assaulted by the station's strong industrial odors. Acrid, oily, and lingering in the back of the throat. Her skin tingled and her head hurt behind her eyes just breathing in this chemical stink. She didn't want to hang around here too long. She readjusted the load she carried on her shoulders and kept to the middle of the sandy footpath that spanned the power station. The cactus stands in the ocean were to the left of her. The large silver coils were to her right. A confusion of cables crisscrossed above her head. The fine hairs all along her forearms stood tall, and the otherworldly hum of phytoelectric energy was loud enough to drown out her own thoughts. She could almost make out the sound of waves crashing against the rocks on the other side, and she could smell the salty sea breeze competing with the overwhelmingly noxious smell of machinery. The man-made stench was winning. That's all I'll read for now.
Awesome. Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for painting that awesome picture of the scene for us. Well, yeah, that's all I had for today. You got any final questions before I let you go?
Uh, yeah, I just wanted to, ask you about your book, how it's doing.
Oh, well, awesome. And no one ever asks about me, so that's nice to hear that somebody cares. Well, yeah, actually, so Secrets of the Erilaz is my debut novel. It's not the
Yep.
first manuscript I've ever written. It was the first one I've ever published. It actually came out technically yesterday. It was up for pre-sale for a couple of weeks. I mean, what do you want to know about it? Just like a blurb or something?
Uh, yeah, if you can just tell me like, the process, what went into it, maybe how you've had like with the whole Amazon publishing process, the how it's been for you.
Uh-huh. So I mean the writing process has been it's been interesting. I wrote it I probably started about 2 years ago, and
Okay.
it morphed from what my original vision was into something very different. As I'm sure every author experiences, right? Like
Yeah.
one of my favorite stories of all time is Hamlet, and so I was like, I'm just going to model a story basically after Hamlet,
Yeah.
and it didn't turn out anything like Hamlet.
Yeah. Of
Maybe
course.
like one kind of part where the main character kind of goes into exile for a little while. Like that's kind of like the only semblance of Hamlet that it kept. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to be part of that process and see how it morphs over time. Um, Also, so I invented this new magic system, and I'm not saying that no one has ever thought of this before. I'm sure it has been thought of before, but it involves runes, using
Okay.
runes to cast this magic, not in like a in an actual magical kind of way where you cast the runes and then good luck happens or something like that. It's actually like you're casting a spell in the moment by casting these runes, and the world around you is transformed as you're watching. I'm not going to get into how. I think that's a little bit of a spoiler. So it was nice to come up with this unique magic system. And then it's a story about the characters. Like a lot of people, they come up with this idea for their world, and they write 1,000 years of history, and they come up with a map with 10 warring kingdoms that are all intertwined and all this politics and stuff. And I didn't want to do that because that's already been done ad
Yeah.
nauseum. And Tolkien has done it better than I could ever do it, and Martin has done it better than I could ever do it. I wanted to write a story about my characters.
Mm.
And so this is a very character-driven novel, where people are confronting their demons, so to speak. Not literal demons. They're each of them are held back from greatness by some, what's the word, internal struggles. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, it sounds pretty crazy. And I get it, where you have an idea in mind, but of course, as you write, it, deviates from that and it wants to, create something on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so how about the publishing process? How's that been?
So I mean, it was very easy.
Yeah.
If you're going to go on Amazon, it's pretty easy. I don't know about anything else. I just self-published, and I originally wanted to find an agent and a publisher,
Yeah.
but I had kind of negative experiences with my first manuscript, which, looking back on it, it wasn't so negative compared to a lot of authors where they say they do like hundreds of
Mhm.
queries.
Yeah.
I did like 30 queries and got next to nothing back, and I was like, F this, I'm done. I'm gonna just do this myself. I'm an impatient man, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, I through the whole querying process, I wish I would have been able to get better feedback. And I totally understand that they don't have time to give tangible feedback to every one of the submissions because they get just an overwhelming amount. I totally understand that. But
Yeah.
it sucks as a creative to not understand why your work is not good enough to get picked up by them. Um, Now, that was my first manuscript. Again, I think I learned a lot writing my second manuscript. I sent it out to a bunch of beta readers. I probably had beta reading is a whole separate topic, but I probably got feedback from between 5 and 10 people on it. Went back and made some revisions before finally popping it up on Amazon. But yeah, the Amazon process isn't hard at all. They give you some steps to follow.
Yeah.
I think the most surprising / difficult part of it was getting all the ISBN numbers. I actually went ahead and just bought like 500 of them or whatever it was, or maybe it was 100. I forget. It was some bulk deal. It was like $30 for one, or like $3 each for 100. I think I don't remember the exact cost, but something like that. I was like, well, now I have a lifetime supply of ISBN numbers. I guess I better not stop writing.
Yeah, it's interesting because in Canada we can just like apply for them, and
Hmm.
I got mine for free. So I don't know. Yeah, it's
You
weird.
socialists.
Yeah. And so I have a question. Was that first manuscript, was that also fantasy or was that a different genre?
So that one's actually a fantasy sci-fi mashup.
Okay.
It starts off like a fantasy, and you think it's a fantasy for the first half of the book, and then I hit you with I'm not going to give you the spoiler. You got to read it when it comes out.
Yeah.
But I hit you with a twist, and you find out that it's actually a science fiction. That
Yeah.
one's called Whispers of the Staff. That one, I'm thinking I'm going to release it this year. It needs a bunch more work, but I mean, I've already written 100,000 plus words on it.
Yeah.
I can just cut some out or revise some stuff. It's not like writing a whole new book. So it's coming out this year, next year.
Yeah, definitely. I tried the whole traditional thing as well. Um, I wrote a book called Reptilian. It was a horror sci-fi. like very gory, very gruesome. I heard back from a couple people, but they told me that it was too far over the edge.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, but when I worked in a bookstore, I realized that a lot of my stuff it just wouldn't fit on the shelves anyway,
Hmm.
uh, because shelf space is hard to get, and they're always rotating new books. So a lot of
Hmm.
books don't sell; they just end up going back to the publisher.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to me, I mean, Amazon is probably the best way to go because it just prints on demand, and there's a
Yeah.
market for everybody.
Yeah. And when I first started writing, I wasn't very like confident in my writing, and I was like, I'm going to do this because I have a story to tell myself.
Yeah,
And if no one reads my book, I don't even care. I just want to be able to hold a book that I've written for myself. And I was finally, God, I'm going to cry right now. I was
yeah,
actually finally able to do that for the first time like a few weeks ago when I held my author proof
yeah.
copy. And it was
Sounds
like,
good.
it was a decade of work almost. Yeah, there you go. It's holding your,
Definitely.
it's just like, it's something that someone who's not an author can't understand because, I sit for hundreds of hours staring at a Google Doc where I write it, but like holding the physical manifestation of it is a
Yeah.
completely different experience.
No, I know it's amazing, and I know exactly what you mean with you're about to cry when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's your baby. It's like it's
Yeah.
got everything that you put into it, and you put in so much time and energy into it.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
it's crazy that people can read it in like 5 hours or something as well. After all the time.
Well, yeah, I think mine is like 105,000 words, so it's a little bit shorter than yours. Depends how fast you read, but yeah, I mean, 5 to 10 hours, they're
Mm,
done with it. And then it took me like 2 years to write, and I'm like, well, next one's coming out in 8 years, or
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm curious. I have a question about. You said yours was it couldn't fit on the bookshelf, right? I
yeah.
feel like my Whispers of the Staff might not be able to fit on the bookshelf either, for one very specific reason. I'm going to tell it to you, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Okay.
I have a race of beings in my book that are genderless. And so I came up with a pronoun for them instead of he or she, it's Z,
Yeah.
Z-I-E. And I use that a lot. Now, telling it to you, maybe it makes sense, but do you think it would be too jarring for a reader to read Z as a pronoun over and over again?
Um, I think initially it would be, but I feel as they read it, it would just be like seeing he or she.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like their eyes would just kind of just glaze over it.
Okay.
Um, and I feel like these days that idea actually would have a lot more weight because like these days LGBTQ stuff is a lot more prevalent, and
Mm-hmm.
there's more of a market for it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. I guess I won't
Yeah,
pull that out.
definitely.
Cool. Well, yeah, hey, I appreciate you asking me about my book. I never get to talk about myself, and I love talking about myself.
Yeah, no, I was thinking I saw yours just came out, so I wanted to
Mhm.
ask.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so yours came out just, what was it, like less than a week ago or a week ago or so?
Yeah, the Kindle came out on the 22nd, and the
Okay.
paperback came out on the 26th.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
Well, congratulations to you as well. We're both on this author journey together.
yeah.
Everybody, we had Mike Marsbergen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.